Seeing a quorum present, I'll call to order the June 22nd meeting of the. Is this the board meeting?
This is the board meeting.
This is the board meeting of the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District. Are there any matters from the floor that are not on the agenda? Seeing none. Is there any changes to the agenda?
I move approval.
There's a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right. There are no information items or items of correspondence. The consent agenda, item 5.1, approval of minutes, and the approval of the check register, item 6.1, 6.2, and 6.3. I would consider a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Motion second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Item 8.1, board updates. I do not have a report. I am serving because our chair is at the summer tour of the MAUD group, and that is my report. Manager Miller, you want to do a quick report about today's meeting?
No.
Okay.
Everybody was there and participated fully, and it's to be continued discussion of the HR plan and budget considerations.
Sounds good. Thank you. Item 8.2, upcoming meeting and event schedule. On July 13th, we'll have a policy and planning meeting at 4:30 here. Later at 6:45, there will be a board workshop. On July 27th at 4:30, there will be a policy and planning meeting here. And later that evening at 6:45, there will be a board meeting. I'm seeing no public hearings and presentations, no permits requiring variance or discussion. Item 11.1. Ms. Christopher, Resolution 17-043, authorization to distribute comprehensive plan for review and comment.
Thank you, Chair, managers. Pull up my presentation. All right, so yes, tonight staff is requesting authorization to distribute the plan for 60-day review. As you know, I've been providing kind of draft materials to the board and CAC to give a chance to review and provide feedback along the way as it's come together. And we reviewed and discussed a draft at the June 8th PPC meeting. A few sections were still being finalized at that point, so I wanted to take a little time to walk through those today since you haven't had as much time to review those. And then also just wanted to note that there's a number of edits both to text and layout that have been identified by staff or managers or consultants or CAC that we're tracking and incorporating but are not in layout yet. Just for sake of efficiency, we're kind of doing that all at once here in the next week. So if you see some of those things that you've maybe commented on previously, they're not made yet, that's why we're doing it kind of in one fell swoop. I've got just a brief presentation. I wanted to provide a little bit of background first, just kind of recapping kind of the main goals with this plan and the development process that's led us to this point. And then, as I said, provide kind of a brief overview of those sections that were added just in the last couple of weeks. And then talk a little about kind of the plan for rolling this out for review. So, kind of just going back to kind of the main goal and focus of the plan from the beginning has been to really create a framework to support our new way of doing business, balanced urban ecology approach, and supporting kind of those guiding principles of doing our work in partnership with the land use community, having increased focus, establishing clear priorities in where we do our work, and then also creating a plan that provides flexibility to be kind of opportunistic and respond to changes on the landscape. In terms of the development process, there's been a pretty substantial external public input process with our 3 advisory committees that have met a number of times over the last 2 years. We also had a series of sub-watershed meetings late last year where people came in and told us about kind of local plans and priorities that were then incorporated into the sub-watershed plans. We had a couple other more kind of targeted events with the NEMA boat tour for policymakers and the planners breakfast that we hosted here. And then a number of things also just to kind of reach broader audiences, including kind of information requests that went out, different publications that were sent out along the way, and then just using the website as another tool to share information and get input. And then internally, of course, we had a series of policy and planning committee meetings along the way, focused mainly on kind of policies and the overall approach for the plan. We established new mission, vision, goals, and guiding principles, and we went through, of course, the extensive kind of program evaluation and strategic planning process, culminating in the strategic alignment report that the board adopted. So just kind of a recap of the last 2 years. In terms of kind of those newer sections, one that was finished kind of a couple weeks ago was the program descriptions, section 3.5. Those basically, for the most part, are just kind of the outcome of the strategic plan, outlining purpose and priorities for each program. And then some, the CIP and the land conservation and cost share are a little more robust. There's a lot more procedural information in there. Some of that's required to meet 8410 requirements. And there's actually a few other things that we need to still beef up as well to make sure we're meeting all those requirements about things like enforcement process, monitoring locations. Some of those things we have to make sure are adequately covered. Section 3.7, evaluation and reporting. I kind of walked through an outline of this at the PPC, but basically that section talks about kind of both observed and predicted outcomes and the different metrics we use. So the observed being what we're actually measuring out in the water bodies and on the landscape, and then the predicted are more of those kind of modeled or estimated outcomes based on the work that we're doing. That section also talks briefly about the strategic plan process that we undertook, as kind of just looking at program effectiveness and kind of the goal of continuing to maintain and revisit that moving forward. And then finally, that section outlines specific measurable goals beyond just our 4 strategic goals of water quality, water quantity, ecological integrity, and thriving communities. So those are things like meeting state standards for TMDLs, that kind of thing. And then it also provides a list of metrics that we will track and report on, and with what frequency. The other pieces that were kind of finalized the last couple of weeks were the subwatershed plans. I had provided Christmas and Painter before as examples, but now we've got all 11 in there, and they all follow a similar structure with an executive summary and then an overview of kind of the resource needs piece, so the water resource issues, those drivers, and the management strategies associated with those. Then there's a section on kind of land use summary, and that's based on, again, the information we got from communities through the watershed meetings, and things like, what the anticipated development activity is, anticipated infrastructure investment, some of those things that might open up opportunities for partnership or to get some projects on the ground. Then it kind of wraps up with about a page-long section on implementation priorities, where we kind of tie everything together and just kind of recap. These are the issues, therefore these are the strategies, these are what we know are opportunities, and therefore these are kind of the implementation priorities for our programs and projects. And then finally, it's the CIP for each subwatershed with kind of those project details that are required in terms of cost and schedule and funding sources. So just to talk a little more about kind of the CIP and what projects we chose to include in this plan. The majority are focused on the 3 focal geographies of Minnehaha Creek, 6 Mile, Halstead Bay, and Painter Creek. And then in addition to those, we've included stormwater management for all of the subwatersheds. And kind of the reasoning behind that is that kind of one, that's most likely to be the opportunities that come up. If there's infrastructure projects or development, it's most likely going to be stormwater management things that we would want to incorporate with those. And that's also just kind of the best place to start, generally speaking, in terms of managing watershed issues. You're going to want to do kind of that external load before, internal loading or some of those other things. So that is something we've kind of included across the board, kind of for those opportunity-driven projects. And then also kind of in this implementation priorities section, we characterize all the other kind of services and programs that we have beyond just providing projects in the different subwatersheds. So, we've got obviously grants we can be responsive with. We can provide technical assistance. We've got CARP management identified in certain subwatersheds, education and outreach, capacity building, all those kinds of things as well. And then we also include language in each one that basically if we determine through the plan cycle that greater capital investment is warranted because some great opportunities come up, or we just identify as a priority area, then we always have the option to plan amend, and that's not that big of an undertaking. So that would be kind of the approach. So we're trying to be more realistic in kind of the projects that we're including this time, more realistic and more focused, and again, we've got the flexibility to change that at any time through a plan amendment if we feel it's warranted. Another new piece is the appendix, and this just outlines the public process and some of the things I talked about with all the committees we've had, who was on those, all the other outreach efforts we've had along the way, and kind of the feedback that we've gotten from people is all in that appendix. And then the final piece that was added these last couple of weeks is 3.10, the implementation tables, where we outline and summarize kind of the programs and their annual budgets, and then the CIP table with all the projects. And I've included just kind of some summary numbers here. So first for the programs, the numbers that we've used there are based on kind of the last couple of years' budgets. And certainly, if the board wishes, those could be modified. That was just kind of seemed like the most logical thing was to kind of go with current budgets, so that if people are, kind of tracking our budget process, they see that those are kind of in line. And these, of course, are estimates, not actual budgets. We're not, held to these. We don't have to amend the plan if we, go above them or anything like that. It's just kind of a...
It's 25% less than the last 10-year, last comprehensive plan. It would call for $100 million budget.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I had some of those numbers for the CIP. I guess I didn't total it up for programs, but
No, I was just CIP.
yeah, just CIP. Well, I think that included a lot of the O&M and stuff too. In terms of just capital numbers, I thought it was interesting. So the total that we've got here for the CIP for capital costs came to $76 million, and I think for the last plan, just purely for capital without kind of land or operations, was $78 million, so just about the same. But of course, how that was distributed is quite different. It's a lot more focused and targeted this time around. So again, for the CIP, those are the numbers there. About $20 million for completing the work in Minnehaha Creek, about 36 for 6 Mile Halstead Bay, 9 million in Painter Creek, and then about 9 million for those subwatershed projects that I mentioned throughout the other subwatersheds, coming to about 76 million, or kind of 7 or 8 million a year, which again, we explained in the plan, these are not, not real budgets. And we're not going to do all of these projects. So again, a lot of them are opportunity based. So these are just kind of the full range of things that may happen.
How are you going to word that description? That these are potential projects rather than identify. I just, have you got an idea of how you're? Yeah, I guess not off the top of my head, but yeah, I think that'll be important to message in like the cover letter and everything that goes out, that it is, again, we have kind of this approach of things being opportunity driven, that these are not, I mean, it's similar messaging to what goes out with the CIP every year, that they're not real budgets, they're just kind of projected best guesses.
Is there a way to, Dick's point, and kind of thinking back to the experience I've had in the last 10 years, I get phone calls from them, elected officials primarily saying, I'd like to do this project, what's in your plan? And I've got to believe there's somewhat a similar descriptor in the plan 10 years ago.
Not really. Matter of fact, our planning director at the time was on TV and said it was $100 million expenditure that we're anticipating.
Okay.
You know, I was a little startled with that, but you know, I don't know what we actually spent, but
I guess what I'm doing is, would it be possible to put it into the narrative at some point, like maybe near the introduction of that of the section, just so it's.
these have been identified as potential projects, and if they were all done, this would be the budget. However, we don't see opportunity for all of them, and
Yep.
you know, the engineering and feasibility may prove that they're not feasible, et cetera.
And resource limitations.
Huh?
And resource limitations.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and like I said, this time around, we're being much more targeted and have a much more limited and what we think is more realistic list of projects, but still not all of those will happen. And the other thing to mention too with the estimates that are in there is that it wouldn't all be district funds, it would be other sources as well, and so we do list that in all of the project descriptions.
Would you list the potential sources?
Yes,
Like
they
Corps
are.
of Engineers, you know,
Yep.
whatever. Good,
Yep, those are all included.
that'd be great.
And we're going to have a section just on funding strategy kind of in the narrative as well.
Good.
So, yep.
Yeah, I would just jump in. A lot of that's already in there. Becky and I have talked about in the remaining time before distribution, just making sure that we have the right level of language and caveats about what this is, that it's not a budgeting tool, but they all are also somewhat realistic targets on what you might be spending in some of these geographies based on the scale of implementation that's driven by the issues that have been identified, what's driving those issues, and the management strategy. So we spent an awful lot of time in 6 Mile looking at what it's going to take to manage the fisheries, what it's going to take to restore wetlands, and you know, have directed staff to work with Three Rivers on an acquisition for a project that alone is $10 to $15 million out of that $36 million. So they are realistic targets, but it's a 10-year plan. They're not 10-year costs. It's not a budgeting or financing tool. There's a lot of outside sources, and in the CIP language it talks about for these subwatersheds and for each project that there's an investment strategy or a funding plan developed that leverages local, regional, state, federal funds to put into these, and that we have an annual budgeting process, which is where those decisions are made and what the planning is that goes into these projects before they become real numbers. And I think for most of the folks that have been working with us the last several years and understand capital improvement plans versus budgets and how projects get developed, that should resonate. It's not too far off the last plan. And also, if you just break down the budget discussion we just had, where we're somewhere over a $6 million projected budgeted expenditure for the CIP next year, and you extrapolate that out over 10 years, you're not too far off. So I think it's all pretty reasonable. You're going to get comments that aren't all positive. That's just the nature of putting something like this out for comment.
Yeah, and again, with the CIP as well as programs, we don't have to amend for differences in cost. So it would just be if there's, you know, an entirely new project or a real change in the scope of a project would be when we would need to amend. Which is a change from last time around. And the last time we had put a self-imposed requirement in there that if it was greater than 20% difference in cost, we would amend. So we have not done that this time. Any other questions on that before I move on? So in terms of kind of the rollout strategy, first in terms of how we're distributing the plan, there will be, again, a cover letter and then a copy on a CD or flash drive that goes out to the cities, counties, agencies, kind of all the required entities. And then we'll send an email with a web link to a broader distribution list, basically all those that we've been engaging through the whole process, including, lake associations, the full, city councils and staff, neighboring watershed districts, a whole host of others. And then again, it'll be posted on our website, kind of open to the public. We'll have a comment form on there as well. And then, during the review period, a few things that we're planning to do are meet with each of the advisory committees kind of midway through the review period to kind of get inputs, kind of give them the highlights, see what kind of questions are out there. And then something else we've been talking about, I talked a little with Telly about that would be good, is hosting some kind of meeting, breakfast meeting or whatever turns out to be the best option to make sure we're engaging any cities or others that didn't participate in the committees, just to make sure they're tracking and we can address any questions that they have on the draft. And then also we'll offer to make council presentations or things like that as requested. And then, of course, we'll have a public hearing as part of the process. That'll come after the 60-day review and after we've responded to comments, so that's going to be in October. And then, of course, once the plan is actually adopted, we'll do kind of some broader publication and press releases and all of that to show what a great plan it is. So those are just kind of a few highlights I wanted to cover, and that's really all I had. Take any questions the managers have.
Any questions?
I just got a comment. I really want to compliment you on the great work this represents. I know you put a lot of extra hours in. It wasn't all done in 40-hour week. I'm sure. Compared to the original meeting we had several years ago in that room there, starting out the discussion of the planning. I can't believe the better outcome that we got from this project than following the original proposed layout for the plan and the objectives. This is really a proud piece of work, and I'm really pleased to be associated with it. And I think it's going to represent some really good work for the next 10 years.
Thank you.
I'd like to echo all of that. I just have one question, of which I have no opinion, other than I'm just curious. I found out today that I'm getting a new computer at work that's going to lack a CD drive.
Oh.
And so
You
I
get a CD.
What's that?
You're getting a CD.
Interesting.
I was just kind of, I asked the question, well, what am I going to do when I
That's a good
receive
point.
things?
It might be better to do flash drives, I suppose. I just assumed they'd be maybe more expensive, but, well, and it's goofy. The state review roster, they all ask for it in a different way. Some want a CD, some want a hard copy, some want a flash drive, so we gotta kind of accommodate all that. But yeah, maybe flash drives are a better option in general.
I don't have an opinion. I was just jumped out of it because I learned.
I want mine just in white paper.
Do that.
Not ivory, a little off white.
25
Good point.
Any other questions? Now, this is under action items. Do we need to, what do we need to do?
It's an RBA for authorization to distribute.
Second. There's a motion and a second to authorize resolution 17-043. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Good work.
Yeah, terrific.
Exciting. All right, board discussion items. There are none on the agenda. Anybody want to raise anything? Item 13.1, administrator's report.
Thank you, Manager, Secretary, and Managers. I have a few quick updates. This past Saturday, June 17th, there's a butterfly release for cancer survivors at Methodist Hospital that some of our staff participated in with a booth. And also, Laura provided tours of the boardwalk, and it was extremely well received. So that's another where we're kind of partnering and being visible in some of our project investment areas that have been really well received. Coming up, we have some of our 50th anniversary events. We have I shouldn't probably announce the Shoreline Garden Tour on Lake Minnetonka because it's currently sold out. It's fully subscribed, so we're going to see if there's an opportunity to kind of increase the capacity for that. We released a call for nominations for Watershed Heroes this past week. As you recall, at our last meeting, we kind of had an updated version of the Watershed Heroes that will be part of the culminating event in November for this year's 50th anniversary event. So there'll be an internal review process that will include staff, CAC, and the board that will kind of be evaluating those as they come in. But we encourage you to kind of consider if you have suggestions for potential nominees, and please forward those to us. There's also been some nice press recently for the Shoreline Garden Tour in some magazine articles, and the Southwest Lake and the Lake Minnetonka both had kind of articles that are featuring some of our current projects. So we continue to kind of have some pretty high profile coverage. In terms of some of the other activities, this week some of our planning staff attended a meeting with the Wasserman Lake Association that was also attended by the Mayor of Victoria, just to kind of overview some of the district's initiatives in the 6 Mile Halstead Bay sub-watershed, and also some of the planning process to date for the park project that's as part of that area too. And I assume that went pretty well, I think. Some nods from Anna and James. The Minneapolis Park and Rec Board is concluding some of their efforts for public engagement for the Hiawatha Golf Course project, and is setting kind of their process to make decisions to advance planning for a decision in July. So that's coming together, and we continue to be participating and tracking some of those things.
What year?
My understanding is that the decision is July this year of 2017.
With the golf course closing potentially in 2019, or 2019 means last revenue year service for the golf course.
The work continues at the Preserve Enhancement Project, which was kind of the access and trail connection. I understand the curb has been poured, so the paving will happen, and after that's cured, and the rubble that, I think when we toured that spot, there's a significant amount of rubble that we thought might exceed capacity. So far to date, that's within budget, so that won't be require additional board action. And I know that Manager Miller and Manager White attended a public meeting regarding the Arden Park project, that Renee and James hosted a meeting of residents that had concerns. And there will be additional community meetings as we kind of continue to be responsive to some of their concerns, and so it's probably not going to be advancing to council until July.
I attended that meeting, and I was really pleased with the work the staff did, because it was, and it wasn't necessarily informational, it was opposition driven meeting, and the staff did a superb job of keeping the discussion positive and informative, and I think people came away with an entirely different opinion about the watershed district, in spite of the prejudice they may have had coming in about our heavy-handedness of what planning that they were told that we were involved in. They had no idea that the city had been involved for so long, and our consultant from Interflu, which is superb, absolutely superb. It was, first of all, he looked like he was from Central Casting for an environmental presentation, and he answered everything so factually that it was just, it kind of presented a level of field for discussion about turn the discussion from beautiful waterfalls to the damage that's done to the environment with dams, and cited all of his experiences, and wasn't challenged. Statements were made about the temperature of the water behind the dam, and it wasn't accurate at all, and the benefit of having a pond, a pool below the falls, below the dam, and it was really It was very informative and well-managed discussion. And staff did a lot better than I would have done with the way that the meeting started out, but finished in a good tone.
It's good to hear.
And my last thing is that the RFQ was issued for the work along the Minnehaha Creek in Minneapolis related to FEMA repairs and some of the shoreline things that we also visited on the tour, some of those locations. So I believe there were 5 responses, and we look to have some of the interviews, probably 2 to 3 interviews with the park board July 7th. So and that'll be coming back to the board at the end of July.
Sounds good. Anything else? Then we're adjourned.
Director.
Perfect.